Hi everyone, my name's Doug, and I'm the author of two books 2018 My Last Hope, 2019 My Last Hope. I am going to be reading some stories from these. This first story comes from my first book. It's not even in the book, it's in the introduction. And it is the final 6-month period, which got me to the point where I was able to begin to write. So, bear with me here. I met Evil at my door. Evil smiled. We embraced. I invited him in. He was warm and comforting. His beauty filled me indescribable, and he showed up with the darkness. The following account of a nightmare which consumed me in every way for 6 full months in 2022 is a single direct note written with an urgency unparalleled. This note, written in this manner, is the closest mere words can capture what cannot be captured in any other way other than the experience itself. This experience completes a journey to the mindset which finally allowed this book to begin to be written. Transcendence through this is where I had to be as to make good on my original deal back in October of 2018, my last hope. Feeling myself dig my own grave with arms losing circulation and mobility, thinking of stepping out of the hole I dug, but watching, as diabetics do, the ends and then more of my toes, and soon my feet, become more fit to be in a grave than to remain in the world of the living. Feeling discomfort and pain as I felt the anxiety of not knowing which choice I would take, a decision I knew was coming exponentially quicker and quicker with each coming day. Knowing it wasn't a future decision, but one I needed to make in haste. I needed to put serious thought into taking the route of beginning a medical amputation, one toe at a time. Knowing there would be a moment I faced the situation and went to the emergency room to get it started, or I would have to take the second choice by taking matters into my own hands. The options, after neurotic and stressfully damaging to my brain to think so hard on, were both dreadful ideas. Knowing what I was debating, spending time concerned with it and how it got to that point, and knowing worse than that. Knowing the progression and the still more exponentially fast pace I could expect it to ramp up, the devastation in all aspects of my physical existence, that second choice I was almost for sure going to go with. It was exactly my style. I had long passed the point where those thoughts were not on my radar. I had pondered enough on a ludicrous scenario which was now playing out as my standard daily life, and for long enough to have me make an actual effort to ponder on this unpleasantry. The specifics and the details had consumed my waking mind. For me to conclude that an axe, a flat metal sheet, a piece of wood to prop my foot, and a second of time where I would need to go beyond what I'd come to see as the pivotal no-turning-back moment. That was almost fully set in my mind. When it became time for me to pay the piper with my body, I had to be ready for atonement. My soul had long since been raped irreparably by itself and by its only recourse for any semblance of surviving in a shadowland of syringes. When bags of hundreds of needles arrived daily, sometimes twice a day, and where quantities of incoming cocaine measured not in grams but in fractions of ounces, which are regimentally weighed, measured, and meticulously prepared, then administered and felt, and then pushed to where the edge is ridden, like a surfer rides a huge swell, pushing to point break and daring the wave to wash me into oblivion. At any moment, one false movement would cause disaster before I knew what even happened. A scale that weighed each dose of injection to the thousandth instead of the hundredth of a gram because of such a thin margin of error. The phone timer where a stopwatch was started like it was a race. The rating of each wave on a scale of 1 to 10, where a 7.5 was ideal. Any shot skirted on 8 became and remained scary, as the effects made me fully aware I had passed into the danger zone, and I wasn't in control anymore. I was at the wave's mercy, and I fully knew it, and that scared me more. Being scared, as can be imagined, wasn't the calm I wanted to not go over the edge. Being scared just added more stress to an already critical mass brain and heart. It was an art to catch that moment, as the wave disabled my steering when I was forced to lean into and accept the rest of the ride. I had no idea where the wave was going. The fear was real because the chance of going off the rails and into oblivion was more ominous than all else. And all the extreme and taxing stresses that would take me on that ride which touched on insanity, It would invite me to see the shore become smaller as I washed out into the storm-churned waves. If I made it to the shore, that wave would wash back to sea, leaving me alone and dry on the beach, feeling like happiness washed out back into the water without me. It left me not just ready to surf again, but desperately clamoring to get back to the dark, choppy abyss, all within 45 minutes or less between injections. The highest highs, and even beyond those highs, to where fear and immediacy and instant regret and hindsight and hope bargaining and fingers crossed, as I knew I'd momentarily won above the top-tier threshold of euphoria, and as the intensity red line in the next 2 minutes leveled off as that micro amount fell off to bring that relief, knowing it was going to allow me to be back in control again, and when I saw the routine with the quantities of drugs going through veins and hundreds of needles being used so fast that Amazon's off day meant it would be hundreds of reuses of my dull needles from that morning and the day before, and knowing the routine to that point in all aspects and planning, and the thousands spent weekly, and the ounces acquired with the thousands, and knowing it was just me and my 110-pound friends sequestered in that bedroom together, each with our assembly line style of works and equipment on our designated sides, where we rode this demon wave over and over into oblivion. Where I was also stressed being the one who had to not just inject myself, but him as well. Shaking a nerve situation made it not an option for him to self-inject. And the 6 days a week, every week, and the reused needles, and the many, many spots of entry, and the missed shots from collapsed veins, or the arterial hits, and the lack of sleep, and the lack of nutrition, and subpar hydration, and damage from the drug and any impurities mixed in, and anything from a non-sterile environment, and all of which compounded from that. The days and nights blurred together as time lost all meaning, our isolation in a room as the world outside ceased to exist. And the time it took to hit when it was a challenge, and waiting to feel that pleasure, but not being able to hit, and stressing, and frustration, and anticipation, and immediacy, and annoyance, all bouncing off a compromised brain, and the knowledge that sooner and sooner will begin the necessary removal of my physical body parts, beginning with the second toe on my right foot, and knowing I'd do it myself, and the dismantling and decimation of my entire being would be done to me by my own hands. Those same hands which gladly, still in that moment of decision, never failed to hit the one shot during each 45-minute timed increment, and almost always came in far closer to just a half hour between surfing each wave. And paralysis had always been one of my two biggest fears. I always thought if I were to lose the ability to move my body, I'd rather be dead. I was losing mobility at my own hands as that addiction progressed. I often contemplated the next leap directly into that first of my biggest fears. The moment self-preservation gave way to the removal of pieces of me in the order I saw needed, the order in which I thought I would preserve the shadow of my once whole self, and that self-imposed hell which I was the gatekeeper at every single level. The mental omission, a glaring paradox into my utter stupidity. I was causing one of those fears which I vowed death before conceding relegation. I was fully aware. I kept course anyhow. Then, double nuts as that, I pondered the best way to begin the complete destruction of all I was as a human being. My reasoning being to preserve my existence, if possible, by doing ghoulish things to myself, things which each time would markedly downgrade a quality of life I'd been adamant forever that I would never accept at an entry level. And now, that other of my two biggest fears was rapidly closing into my horror reality. The other, a fear which was more panic-inducing than losing use of my body. I was already so deep in the hole I dug, a hole which would absolutely and rapidly serve as my future grave. I looked up sometimes. I thought I would climb and just follow the light I saw, and then I realized my worst fear was now also right in front of me. The light, that beacon to climb toward, began to dim and lose focus. When I would be in the dark, my vision would drastically be diminished. Blindness. I remember being so irrationally scared of blindness as a child that I'd not be able to sleep for long time periods. That irrationality as a child grew into a legit reason-based fear as I stood in the grave that I dug for myself. That fear, like the fear of paralysis, never left me. That fear frightened me to my core. At any time, a number of either predisposed items or a number of consequential conditions and actions or a 1 in a billion random freak event could cause eyesight to no longer exist. The world known and moved in always. The world, the only way I managed it. it could instantly become absolutely another thing in basically every possible way and aspect, affecting every bit of my everything, no longer permitting any view beyond those ever steeper and darker walls of my grave. And now, the second of my worst lifelong fears, the fear which scared me the most, the fear which shook me to my core, had also come to play at a rapid progression. I sat at a card table in hell as I looked into the eyes of what I feared most, averting my gaze in the times I knew I had nothing against my opponents, feeling a way I'd never felt, knowing it was I who called the card game. I invited them, and as I feared them, sitting not just in my universe but right there with me, winning bigger and bigger pots each hand I played with them, I knew no bluffing could hide the weak cards in front of me. I watched the chips stack up in front of my fears. I saw my chips dwindle to an amount no true poker player would sit down with at a table, and I willingly handed over more and more of my final reserves to those evil and darkness-filled adversaries as they were sitting with me, piercing my wavering eyes with steady and sure gazes. I fully knew that every tiny aspect of the horror and unbelievable betrayal playing out at the card table in hell were all acts of a terrifying and slow death, one which I was doing to myself.